All right, hello and welcome everyone to the fourth of our On Foreign Policy Candidate Conversations. My name is Tim Horgan, and I am the Executive Director of the World Affairs Council of New Hampshire. We're so pleased that you are joining us either live or watching the recording of this to learn more about your options in the upcoming New Hampshire primary race for the U.S. Senate. Again, as we've mentioned every time, the primary in New Hampshire is set for September 13th, an auspicious day, we'll say. Lucky for some, unlucky for others. We'll find out who in just a couple of weeks. But we are a nonprofit, nonpartisan organization, and therefore we are not here to take stances on policy, candidates, party, or anything of the nature. We are here as your platform for discussion and to present information which you can then take and use how you see best fit into your life. We hope that you do take the opportunity to make your voice heard in the upcoming election, whether you vote in the Democratic or Republican primary. Just get out there and vote. Make your voice heard. It's very important to our democracy and to moving our country forward. So with that, I'm going to bring on here with me Andy Martin. He is running in the, he's a candidate for the U.S. Senate race coming up in the primary. He has done a lot of reporting, a lot of work, authorship, etc. around various topics, and we're very excited to have you here today. We're going to give Andy an opportunity to give some remarks, and then we'll go into some question and answer. So Andy, over to you.
Well, thank you for having me. It's a pleasure to attend. And I have a somewhat unique background because I've been on the road around the world for over 50 years. As I say, I've never been to Paris, but I've managed to hit most of the hellholes in the world, from Libya to Lebanon, the civil wars to Saudi Arabia, to Vietnam, Cambodia, Thailand, Laos, Afghanistan, and on and on and on, Iran, and of course now Ukraine. Basically, the United States Senate does have an important role to play in foreign policy. The Constitution allocates the decision-making power to the president. So he is the final authority. But the president can't act against the people, and he has to bring the people with him. What I'd like to do today is focus on my recent work in Ukraine, because that's literally on the front pages. I did preparation, I did investigation and reporting. There's a picture of me at the Kyiv train station after a 20 or 22 hour train ride, looking a little bedraggled. And that's how I felt. Sure. Anytime you go into a war zone, you don't know what's going to happen. A couple of days ago, the Russians blew up a train that was going into eastern Ukraine. In general, the train system, I call them miracle workers, the Ukrainian national railways have continued to function fairly normally, even in cities under siege. They slip in under cover of darkness with their locomotives and their passenger. So I'm going to start with a three-part presentation. First, a little bit of the history. I think it's important to kind of look back only 30 years, really. Secondly, I'd like to give a little insight to the work that I did, which was published at my blog, contrariancommentary.wordpress.org, because it was a very, very accurate analysis and prediction of how the war has unfolded since May. My headline was, "The conventional wisdom is wrong," and it turned out I was right. And finally, I'm going to give some insight into where I think the war goes now. And once again, I have some very unusual views and conclusions and analysis. When the Soviet Union collapsed in 1991, First of all, no one expected a collapse, least of all the Ukrainians. One day they woke up and they found out that essentially they were free, and they didn't have a clue what had happened or where they were going or how they were going to go. All of the people who ran the country were the old Soviet apparatchiks. They didn't know what they were doing. One day they were, sitting there talking to the boss man, and the next day they were decision makers. But Ukraine was always a very advanced and sophisticated part of the Russian USSR. It was the center of the armaments industry, industrial production in places like Kyiv. They made weapons. Also, when you went west to Lviv, it also had a doorway, even during the Cold War, to the free world, to intellectualism. Lviv has been a center of learning for 1,000 years, a very long time. Ukraine has some ancient cities, but we just never knew much about it because it was in the background. And so they have been trying, like a newborn, I don't know whether you want to compare it to a baby or a colt or something, they're having a hard time stretching their legs and standing up and moving around. But they have done a terrific job because they've thrown out the old Soviet-style people. Everybody thought when they elected President Zelensky that was going to be a disaster. President Trump, of course, got impeached for a phone call with Zelensky in which he tried to kind of manipulate him, but it backfired. And nobody thought that after 76, 77 years of peace, that we were going to be at war in Europe. It just, we know what goes on in Afghanistan, but that's Afghanistan. We know what the Chinese are always threatening, but that's the Chinese. But Putin, and I don't call him President Putin because he's a dictator and a murderer, but Putin had nibbled here and there on the periphery of the old Soviet Union, but he never took on a country of any serious size. Ukraine has over 40 million people. It has an educated population. It's one of the centers of technology now in Europe. Kharkiv, the second largest city in the country, has a very high-tech presence. So he wasn't taking over a province of Soviet Georgia, for example, in the Caucasus, or trying to level Chechnya. These were tiny little provinces. Ukraine was a serious one. No one thought a war was imminent. In fact, while I was in Ukraine, I always asked the question, did you think they were going to invade? And the uniform answer was no. There's been a little controversy in the last couple of weeks because President Zelensky said, well, I know the CIA told me they were coming for me, but I didn't put that out because I didn't want to scare people. I didn't want to stampede them. But more than that, nobody really believed it. And they woke up on the 24th of February, and supposedly the formidable Russian military, which hadn't fought a war in Europe for 77 years, was clanking and cranking its way into Ukraine. Well, stepping back just slightly, Putin had originally tried to nibble part of Ukraine in 2014, the so-called Donbass region and Crimea. And it was a typical Russian disinformation. Are you going to invade Crimea? Oh no, we're not doing anything. Then he'd go and invade. Are you trying to take over Donbass? No, we have no plans there. Then he would set up. So there had been a low-intensity war in eastern Ukraine, in the Donbass, for 8 years. Well, in 2014, there was essentially no Ukrainian military because they had never morphed out of the old Soviet model. And in the Soviet system, the most important thing is not your military abilities, but your political reliability. So one of the things, for example, that distinguishes the British and American military structure is that we not only have an officer corps, but we have a non-commissioned officer corps. And anyone who's been in the military knows it's the sergeants that run the Army or the Air Force, or in the Navy they're called petty officers. They're the NCOs who keep an eye on the men, train them, keep them lined up, and they also keep the lieutenants in line. So God help you if you fall afoul of a sergeant in the Army or the Marine Corps. So the British and the Americans, through both our, of all places, the Florida National Guard, how they ended up in Ukraine, I don't know, but most likely they had a capability that had been assigned to them by the Pentagon. As they downsized the military, they took regular Army functions and parceled them out. So somehow the Florida Guard got the job of training and orientation. So they had a huge presence in Ukraine. And some of my other colleagues that don't always wear uniforms to the office also were there training these people. So all this was going on essentially under the radar. I don't even think the Russians were spying that much, because nobody in the Russian military ever expected to go to war against Ukraine. I mean, the whole idea is ludicrous as a concept. So below the surface, the U.S. was training the Ukrainians, the British were training them. It was a limited thing. We were using the old weapons, the Soviet era weaponry and stuff, but we taught them how to create discipline in the military, how to have NCOs, how to have platoons and squads, and how to maneuver, and how to do this and how to do that. But nobody really could see that from a distance. It's all very low intensity. But when Russia attacked, suddenly this sort of shadow military came into being. Now, up until then, I think people mostly thought of the Ukrainian military, such as it was, as a potential gang that couldn't shoot straight. And again, I say from a distance, it did not look like an impressive military machine. But it has surprised the world because it became the gang that could shoot straight, literally. And initially they were using light weapons, many provided by the British. The NLAW anti-tank weapon proved devastating to the Russians. When the Russians invaded from Belarus and tried to come down, there were people sabotaging the rail lines in Belarus. But when they got their equipment to the border and crossed, they had no idea what they were going to do. And every night I would watch the famous 40-mile convoy that was going to encircle Kyiv and devastate the city, you know, rubbleize it, as they say in England. The Ukrainians shot it all down. Then they didn't have many fighter jets, but they did have a corps of pilots. It turned out they were decent pilots. President Biden didn't allow Poland to give them 28 additional jets, but they worked with what they had. And all of a sudden, the world saw a fighting presence there. And they saw the Russians as bunglers. I mean, I've lost track of the number of generals they say have been killed. It's a huge number, a dozen. I mean, when have you ever heard of a dozen British generals or American generals being killed in what is essentially still a small operation? Never. The generals are wherever they are, and they supervise the colonels, and the colonels supervise the majors, and the majors bark orders to the captains and the lieutenants, and everything works. The Soviet system doesn't trust anybody, and so they have what we would call in a business school a very flat structure. There aren't NCO, there's no master sergeant and command sergeant major and senior command sergeant major or sergeant major of the Marine Corps. All of that management that we have and the British have doesn't exist in the military in Russia. But it was there as we put it into effect. In Ukraine, suddenly they started winning. Well, it wasn't quite overnight, but I love giving credit to Boris Johnson because with all the messes he made with the COVID matter, which ultimately forced him from office, he had the Ukraine matter dead right. He went to Kyiv, he was out there in the open, I don't think I've ever, if he had a flak jacket on, I'm not sure. He might have had a helmet, I don't remember, but generally Boris is too conscious of his appearance to put on a flak jacket or a helmet. But now we start sending them weapons. The British start sending them. Now the Germans promised they would, but they've been miserable, and the French likewise. But all these other countries on the periphery of the former Soviet Union, Latvia, Lithuania, Poland, which has become our great anchor, our number one ally, really the capital now. Europe, Poland has replaced Germany as our most important ally. Germany is no longer an ally. It's a very mild satellite of Putin and the Russians. All of a sudden, they started contributing what they had. And so, when I got there in May, the pipeline was being established. There were how did the Polish know years ago to invite us in to build this huge air base on the Ukrainian border? There's a huge air base there, and those C-17s are landing every few hours with munitions and weapons and stuff. But ironically, most of what the Ukrainians were using was still their supplies of old Soviet era stuff. And when the Czech Republic and the Slovaks and Bulgarians, I think, donated, and of course the other countries, they were cleaning out their stockpiles of old Soviet era weaponry. The Ukrainians also got help, massive help, from an unlikely source, the tech entrepreneur Elon Musk. For years he'd been developing this satellite system, which would involve thousands of low-powered satellites. And then one day he got up out of bed and said, I should donate a few thousand of these land dishes, receivers, to the Ukrainians. So today, basically, there's no way the Russians can blow up the telecommunications model in Russia, because it's all courtesy of Elon Musk up in the sky. I mean, obviously there are still telephones and the telephone building, but the communication, which is the backbone of the war effort, is up in the cloud. So again, this group of people who were sort of a gang that couldn't shoot straight miraculously morphed into the gang that could shoot straight. They were building weapons in Kyiv, and one of them was fired at the fleet of the Russians and brought down to Moscow, the flagship of the fleet. Now, when they got frustrated, the Russians resorted to atrocities, bombing civilian areas, blowing up schools, and there was the famous theater in Mariupol where there were hundreds of people taking refuge, and the Russians bombed it. They thought they could use terror to intimidate the Ukrainians, but it had the opposite effect. First of all, it didn't affect the Ukrainians one iota in terms of being intimidated by the Russians. And secondly, it only scared the other countries in Europe, the former Soviet Union countries, satellites as they were called in those days, to go back to the stockpile and dig out some more stuff. I don't know that the Polish have any bullets but once again, they were still using the old Soviet era artillery and weapons and whatever. Well, I'm a guy who's at the interstices of military analysis and intelligence analysis. And also, I don't answer to anybody, which is what gives me an independent view. And I said to myself, and it's on the internet because I did post this new Face of War article. I said that it would take until the beginning of July. I picked the 4th of July when I said some of this high-powered stuff was going to start coming. And I also understood from Vietnam and from being in Iraq, whatever the policy mistakes, the U.S. knows how to move product. They have pilots that can fly C-17s. They have loadmasters that can pack them full of whatever's on the tarmac. They'll build a runway, whatever they have to do, they'll build it. And I knew that as this airlift of weaponry started to catch up and they trained the Ukrainians, that really it would be an equalizer for the numerical superiority of the Russians. And I feel sorry for the Russians. No one ever wants to glory in the death of young men, particularly when they're being sacrificed by a homicidal maniac like Putin. But tens of thousands of young Russian men have been slaughtered simply because Putin put them out unprepared. I mean, the Ukrainians, with the help of the British, see, the British are a little different than the Americans. The Americans like to kind of announce everything every day or 2 or 3. Well, President Biden has approved another 700 million, or was it Wednesday he announced 3 billion, and he made a phone call and there are pictures of Biden. British don't operate that way. You know, most people don't even know who the Secretary of Defense is in Britain, Ben Wallace. They don't hold press conferences. Even Boris doesn't say, well, I'm doing this or I'm doing that. It's very subdued. But lots of stuff has been flowing in. And, you know, everybody loves a winner. Although over the summer there was a little concern, could they hold up to the Russians? Then the U.S. weapons came in. Now, suddenly, we're beginning to transition from the, let's call me the hand-me-downs of the Soviet era into modern American weapons. And that's where we go into part 2. Where were we over these 3 months? How did my predictions match up? Why were they so accurate? Well, I knew that all of these weapons were ideal because they had been designed to fight a land war. These were not, we sent them some missiles, but they were light on missiles because Biden was terrified that they'd shoot them at Russia. But my God, we had weapons that could be used in a land war. And I knew that they'd be very effective. Questions, can the Ukrainians learn to use them? Well, these people are a lot more, it's a little sort of an ignoramus viewpoint in the Pentagon. They're very smart people. They're just because we don't know a lot about them doesn't mean they're not. Anybody that can keep a railroad going under bombardment, they're pretty sharp people. So now, over the last couple of months, they've deployed this stuff. And all of a sudden, the Russian advance has stopped. Up until maybe July, they were taking the odd few feet of territory and rebelizing whatever they were doing. But another problem kicked in for the Russians. A lot of their weaponry from the Soviet era had Western parts in it. You know, in those days, the Ruskies, as we used to call them, the Cold War, were our friends. I mean, they weren't, not buddy-buddy, but they were our drinking buddies, Pilots would get together, and whatever. So, they can't get the solid-state electronics they need now. They don't have the industrial capacity because part of it was in Ukraine. No one ever figured out they were going to invade Ukraine. And so they left a lot of their industrial capacity there. I'm sure the Ukrainians, before 2 years ago or 8 years ago, were happy to peddle stuff to them. That's the way people are in business. Now the Russians don't have the industrial capacity to replenish even their old junky type equipment. There was some kind of tank display this week somewhere in former Soviet Union, and the Russians were displaying the T-72 tank. They haven't even deployed that in Ukraine because they're afraid they'll blow them up. So their their inventory of weapons has been compromised at a time when they don't have the capacity to renew it. Whereas the Ukrainians are emptying out now, cleaning out the closets of the old Soviet era weapons, and they're replacing them with British and American, and probably Czechs are going to be there. I don't know if the Germans, God knows what they're doing there. They're pathetic. And the French will come along when it looks like there's some advantage to be gained. They're not what I would call leaders. But once again, you have people questioning, well, why all the money? Why not the border? Well, why are you supporting President Biden, as I am, when the border is open? And the answer is very simple. The border is a separate issue. I disagree with Biden. I'm not a supporter of Biden. I would like to see Biden neutered in November and defeated. I think it's increasingly looking like he's going to run again. So in 2024. But if in politics you show leadership when you work with people that you normally disagree with, when you understand there's a common purpose. So what's our common purpose? We can't allow Russia to start invading countries, or they will invade Lithuania and Latvia and Estonia. They'll threaten Poland. They'll probably make a pass at Bulgaria and the southern. They'll agitate the Serbs to stir trouble there in Kosovo. It's a little amazing, frankly, because Biden takes credit for it. Superficially, he's entitled to take credit for it. But actually, it's the permanent American diplomatic structure and presence that have brought all these people together. Finland and Sweden didn't. In Sweden, I think it was a couple hundred years of neutrality. Finland is a little bit more recently belligerent. They weren't persuaded to join NATO because of Biden's eloquence. One of the points I made today in a statement I wrote was that we're succeeding despite the fact that President Biden appears to be compromised and ill and not terribly well connected from a communications point of view. But over the summer now, the Ukrainians stopped the advance. So in part two, we said, now the Rough Riders have come to the rescue. Lafayette, we are here, as General Pershing said in 1917. And all of a sudden, the Russians have got a problem on their hands, because I haven't read a formal thing, but one of the things that's happening now is to avoid Biden saying no. There's a lot of movement in Europe that doesn't seek American permission. There are, I forget what, they're Bulgarian jets. Suddenly they were on an airbase somewhere, and I think it was, don't hold me to Bulgaria, it might be one of them. But suddenly they weren't on the airbase anymore, and they're all being refurbished. Even the Germans finally delivered some weapons. The British have an excellent long-range multi-unit rocket launcher similar to our HIMARS. British technology is second to none in terms of developing weapons, because they have very small military now. They have to have weapons that work. They don't have anything else. So all this is coming into the pipeline, and now at the end of part two, as I say, we find the attack on the Crimean Air Base, which really blew the minds off the Russians. They were lying there getting a cheap vacation in Crimea, and suddenly whoosh, the place is blowing up literally around them. And then also, I can't remember her name, Rubina or something, the woman that was blown up. Personally, I believe that somebody wanted to blow up her father. There was a change in color. I don't think there's any reason. You know, it would be like trying to get back at Dick Cheney and blowing up Liz Cheney. That's not a real likely proposition. But these things happen in life, you know, they didn't know, or somebody was given instructions and didn't really think them through, and all of a sudden pushed the button and boom, she was killed. But it is now a situation where the war is starting to become a presence in Russia. Not enough of a resistance to throw out Putin or overthrow the government, but this week they said they're going to recruit another 175,000 soldiers, or 135,000, excuse me. What are they going to do with them? Put them on the Donbass on the line? Wherever they go, the Ukrainians now have the HIMARS to hold them up. See, they understand how to target command and control areas, ammunition, POL, petroleum, oil, and lubricants. The Russian game is over, essentially. 135,000 more men to kill is useless. So, in part one, we looked at how this country sort of stumbled into existence and eventually threw off the Russian stooges that were running it. In part two, I explained how when I got there and started doing my field work, I could see how all these pieces were going to come together over the summer. I predicted a start date of July 4th just to be kind of cheeky, and it turned out to be incredibly accurate. And my view that the conventional wisdom was wrong turned out to be correct. Okay, so where do I stand now as I look to September and the end of the year? Well, what I told people when I was in Ukraine was, they asked me, what do you think, boss? And I said, well, here's what I think. This was in May now. I said, I think that we're not going to start to see results until the fall, September. And I think the war will be over by the end of the year. Now, nobody but me believes that. You're going to have it on tape and presumably archived somewhere. I don't know whether it'll be on the internet or it'll be in a closet somewhere, you know. Maybe send it down to Donald Trump to go in the famous closet with a padlock, you know. I don't know, give him something to keep now that he's got all his empty space. But here's where I come in part three. This is the fascinating part. Based on my reporting and my research and my analysis on people that I'm in touch with and so on and so forth, I don't think, let me just say what the conventional wisdom is before I bat it down. The conventional wisdom always was that the Russians were ensconced in the Donbass and the Ukrainians would have to push them out. Would you agree? That's the conventional wisdom? Okay. And with the HIMARS over the last month, they've blown up all of the Russian facilities along the border, anything on the Ukrainian side, and they've nibbled on the other side. There's a city, which I forget what its name is, but it's about 10 miles from Kharkiv, and they go over there and nobody complains. And Biden doesn't say bad boy type thing, so whatever. Pretty much they've honored the limits. And there's a reason why it's in our interest to keep supplying the weapons, because it gives us a degree of control. Now, supposing tomorrow Biden woke up and said, oh my God, what did I do? There's no more weapons for Ukraine. Well, that wouldn't stop the war, because other countries would fill the gap, not maybe with the best weaponry, but there'd still be ways to fight. But freed of any U.S. restraints, within 24 hours, Ukraine would be bombing Russia and blowing up Moscow and other cities there. So the last big military battle of World War II in Russia between the Nazis, the Germans, and the Russians was just on the other side of the border, at Kursk, which is the Oblast of Kursk. So that area has seen a lot of war. And I can tell you that the Ukrainians would say, well, okay, Biden doesn't want to help us, we'll help ourselves. Bum, bum, bum. There have been a lot of restraint here, a lot of restraint. So now I talk to people, and I read what, I think his name is General King, he has a group, he's on Fox News a lot. Nice guy, but I don't think he really has got the moves anymore. And here's what I see. There's no way Ukraine can attack the Russians in Donbass. A, they're dug in. B, it's impossible. I know from the Battle of Hue in Vietnam and other battles in Israel that I covered, and also in Iraq, there is no more deadly form of urban warfare than house-to-house fighting to get to root people out. So, what are they going to do? My prediction is that they're going to try and seize Ukraine. Putin built a vanity project, the Kerch Bridge that connects Crimea. I'm sorry, I said Ukraine, I meant Crimea. He built a bridge from Crimea to Russia. It's a land bridge because there was never a land connection. And so it's called the Kerch Strait Bridge, and it sort of sits there. It's like that old movie, the World War II, The Guns of Navarone, if you've ever seen it. It's on late night nowadays, where they send a bunch of misfits to take out the Guns of Navarone. Well, that bridge is just sitting there. Now, I'm sure it's well defended by the Russians, but they have not proven themselves to be very good defenders. They had no defenses in Crimea when that air base was blown up. They had no defenses when they dropped the drone right over the Navy headquarters in Sevastopol. They really haven't prepared or calculated that Crimea would ever be in play. So, my prediction, and you can mark it down, is that the Ukrainians are going to attack and take Crimea. They'll blow up the bridge, the Kerch Strait Bridge, and then they'll just look at the Russians and say, what more do you want? So, if the Ukrainians could take Crimea, and it's not heavily defended, let me point out. I mean, we saw when, well, whatever story you believe, I tend to believe that there were weapons and that they were clandestinely supplied by an allied force. Possibly a British rocket that was modified. That was I've done a lot of analysis on the bomb craters to see what they look like. Spent a lot of time looking at bomb craters in Iraq and also in Vietnam. The Bay Saint-Condu, as we used to call them, the B-52s. You know what a B-52 crater looks like. That's one theory. Another theory, and somebody has said, oh, it was special forces. I could believe that. But I just don't see how they could carry enough ordnance to do the damage they did on that airport. I won't say it's impossible, but as bad as they are and as unguarded as they apparently are, were these special forces just sort of wandering around, or were they wearing bathing suits and sunglasses and dabbing a little something on their face? I don't know. That's another theory. And there may be others as well. But I tend to go with the theory that somebody either slipped in a missile that worked with the existing weapons but was long range. For example, we've only given the Ukrainians the short range HIMARS missiles. And again, I'm not an expert on the HIMARS, but it's inconceivable to me that the long-range HIMARS aren't using the same tubes as the short-range HIMARS. Maybe they're a little longer, maybe they're a little, I don't know.
Yeah.
But they didn't build two kinds of HIMARS. So one HIMARS, two distances for the weapon. Maybe there was an inventory mistake somewhere, I don't know, Delaware, which is where they shipped everything from, Dover. And they added a couple of these long ones, and then, oh my God, look at this. This is a long-range missile. That's all we got. Hey,
somebody put a little too much rocket.
Yeah, let's try it. Let's see what happens. Okay. We'll send one to Vladimir, see what he thinks. And they fired one of these. Or the British might have. The British have a very good system. Would I be surprised if they modified one of their rockets that fits in this HIMARS-style weapon? Or maybe it's already there, and again, they slipped it in and said, well, if anybody asks you, just tell them it was Lou from Bayonne, something like that, Cousin Lou, because I said from Bayonne, whatever. That's my theory. But I'm not wedded to it, I'm not strong. If it comes out in the end that it was sappers that went in and blew the place up, I won't be surprised completely. And, the bottom line is, it was a learning experience. Because the Russians can't defend Crimea without denuding their forces in the Donbass. They don't have unlimited forces.
Sure.
And as often happens with any army, most of the men in the field are supply people. When we had 500,000 men in Vietnam, there were only 50,000 infantrymen. The other 450,000 men were cooks and laundry people and intelligence and radar and, fixing the tanks and oiling the tanks and replenishing that and keeping an inventory of the weapons. So there aren't that many combat troops, even in the Russian system. They've got to have cooks. They got to feed these people, maybe not well, but they have to feed them. They have to clothe them. Again, maybe not well, but there's a quartermaster out there somewhere that's calling into Moscow and saying, we need boots, or we need uniforms, or we need this, or we need that. So if they were to take all their troops from Donbass and move them to Crimea, Crimea is a very exposed place. It doesn't have mountains. It doesn't have terrain that's good to defend. As near as I can tell, it's relatively flat. Not a place you want to concentrate a lot of military people when the U.S. or somebody has got these long-range HIMARS out there in the ether. So my view is that the Ukrainians are going to surprise the world, and my prediction, by attacking in Crimea, ignoring the Donbass, force the Russians, if they want to defend Crimea, to draw their forces down. And by the way, there's 135,000 people they say they're going to mobilize. That could take months. More likely they would be available in the spring. Not going to be there next month. So Putin has to fight with the army he's got deployed, which isn't much of a military force. So no one has said what I'm saying, and no one has really analyzed it because they have static thinking. I'm a dynamic thinker, and I can tell you that Ukrainians are dynamic thinkers. They're going to move on Crimea. Here's why. It's a military target. I mean, obviously, but it's the plum. If Putin were to lose Crimea, he would be humiliated in the world. He then might fall. How are they going to do with the bridge? The bridge is a dead duck. I wouldn't write insurance on it if you were an insurance agent. It's going. How are they going to get it? I don't know. I can't tell you. But they have managed to do some very creative things. One of the things that was happening while I was there was the siege of the steelworks. And nobody could figure out how they survived and how to cure them on the bones and this and that and the other. But that resupply mission, I was asked if I was interested in going, and I said, I think I'm a bit old for that. my days of flying into fire are maybe gone. When I was 21, it was different. We'd hang out on airplanes, and a famous Vietnam War correspondent, Tim Page, died this week. They were a wild bunch. I was much more staid, I have to be honest with you. But I knew them, we were friends. I didn't know Tim Page as well, but I knew Sean Flynn and Dana Stone and some of the others. And we would see each other, at the 5 o'clock volleys or in restaurants in Saigon or, today. We did a lot of crazy things, and I put myself in that department, hanging outside of a spooky gunship as they're firing 15,000 rounds a minute in the dark. If you asked me to do that today, I'd say, you're nuts. But I have some incredible pictures that I took that were used because I showed just how well they were working. So I didn't go, but I knew that there was a reason they kept that place open. And they were doing things that no one had ever done before in the way of support. This is the kind of stuff we expect from the Marines or the U.S. Army. I mean, really good, well thought out thing. These Ukrainians are good soldiers. They're good warriors. And the bridge is gone, just mark it gone. In my view, when the bridge falls and when Crimea falls, then I think we can say Putin will be very weakened. He may not be weakened enough to fall himself, but at some point, somewhere within that weird system of gangsters and thieves and mafia, will say, boss, you know, the word on the street is, you're gone. Can we help you stay in power? Let's get out of Ukraine. Let's just vamoose. That's what I'm predicting. They're going to take Crimea first. They're going to ignore the Donbass for the Ukrainians to attack in Donbass and Luhansk, for example, would be a suicide mission for Ukrainians. You couldn't displace the Russians. I mean, we're able to neutralize them because we're blowing up their supply lines and blowing up their command and control. But still, a frontal attack on that line of defense would be suicidal for the Ukrainians. So they got to do something. The other thing is, time is not on their side. Every night or every other night, Tucker Carlson and Laura Ingraham on Fox News are attacking the Ukraine, and you know they're trying to make it an either or. If you don't agree with Biden on the border, why are you supporting him? There's no connection. There's just absolutely no connection. Biden is wrong on the border. He's wrong on all kinds of stuff. He's wrong on letting the student debt be written off. But that doesn't mean we don't work with him on Ukraine. But that's how life is. You work with people where there's common interest. For some reason, an unusual form of wisdom, the Congress understands the risk that Putin, and they also understand that everything we're doing is preparatory to take on China, because we can't afford to let Taiwan. If Taiwan were to be taken over and Taiwan Semiconductor was blown up, which it would be blown up in any kind of invasion, we'd face a depression, we'd face an economic winter. Okay, I made my prediction. It's on the record.
Yep. It'll be out there forever.
You got me on tape. Yeah, you got me on tape. You know, that's what I think is going to happen. The decisive battles are going to be fought in Crimea. It's impossible to defend, and the Kerch Bridge is such a visible symbol of Putin's hubris that I don't care how they do it, or that's what they're working on. And I mean, that they would want to take out the Kerch Bridge is not an original thought, but where I am original is I see it as part of a coordinated strategy to hit Crimea and not the Donbass. To me, forget that. I mean, the Donbass is there. No, I'm not trying to be facetious, but forget a frontal assault in the Donbass. That's static thinking. That's General King type thinking. You've got to think like a guerrilla. I was trained in guerrilla warfare, special operation. My father in the Royal Air Force was a commando. So I come out of 3 generations of guerrilla fighters. And even my great-grandfather was a spook, double agent. So I tend to think guerrilla style. But that's what's going to happen. They're going to attack. Now, the other thing is, if you're assigned to the Russian Navy at Sevastopol, I'm not quite sure how to pronounce it, it's a good time to contact their family and have them write an extra life insurance, because they're going to get hit. Yeah. It's too visible. None of this was ever laid out with an idea to defending it against an internal enemy. Essentially, this is an internal enemy. The Ukrainians know the Russians. It's not like they're strangers. You know, if we went to India and tried to fight India in India, might have a hard time. We didn't do so well in Afghanistan, and many people have attributed it to a certain kind of cultural ignorance. Likewise, I know, because I was there in Iraq, Cheney, Darth Vader, whatever you want to call them, and Bush had no idea what they were doing. They invaded the country without anything. So my prediction is, look for the attacks to come in Crimea, look for the bridge to fall, and with that, if Putin doesn't get out, then his days will be numbered. I don't think Russian mothers want another 150,000 kids killed. I just don't.
Yeah, that's That's great. Thank you so much for sharing your insights. I do have a couple of follow-on questions
Sure.
for you about Ukraine and about U.S. role in the world. So you talked a lot about the weapons that are being sent to Ukraine. I heard a report today from the front lines that the Ukrainian military is still outgunned, and every one shot of artillery they put out, they get 5 back or somewhere in that range. The U.S. alone has promised billions upon billions of dollars worth of support. What more can be done to help even the playing field?
Whoever manufactures the rockets for the HIMARS units should be on 24/7. The Russians cannot continue to fire a lot of shells because they're running low. That's why you don't see those air launched. Remember early in the war, they had these bombers that were up in the sky over Russia, and they would fire air-launched missiles with devastating effect. They don't come very often. I don't know what kind of weapon they used in that town when they blew up the train, but the reason the Russians have gone silent is not because they are wanting to be, they don't have the inventory and they can't manufacture it. But you see, Europe is united, the free countries in Europe. Forget Germany, forget France, they're useless pieces of crap. I call him here Schultz. I know it's Schultz, but it's Sergeant Schultz to me.
Yeah.
I see nothing, I hear nothing, whatever. I go and I check the garage and I clean that old gun for you. Yeah, disgusting. But Poland and the Baltics and the other countries there, they're working together, but you don't see it. They don't issue press releases. There's no picture of, I don't know, whatever he is, the president of Bulgaria talking to Zelensky. But there is a massive armament program there to be sure that they have weapons. And the other thing is it's the quality of weapons. See, the HIMAR thing, of course, it's an American designed weapon, but it's designed to be very, very deadly. And it was never used before. I don't want to sound crass because I'm not, and I don't want to sound cruel because I'm not, but in essence, we're getting to test a lot of these sort of modern doomsday weapons against the Russians, and that's why they're protesting. But it has devastated just the few that they have now, which is like, I think, 16 or something, the command and control centers and the supply dump. Without ammunition, without POL and the petroleum, oil, and lubricants, without maintenance sheds, without a headquarters where you can plan. How do you fight a war? You can't. So poor Ivan, the soldier, is sitting out there. Yes, they're still firing some rounds. They have some inventory, but I don't believe they have the capacity to really replenish their inventory. Whereas in our case, we're in so far, I think, that Congress will stick it out. The second part of what I have to say, I didn't get to today, but I'll be posting it on my website, Contrarian Commentary, talks about what has to happen in Washington. When Biden says, as long as it takes, in a sentence, that's a delusional attitude. We don't fight wars under a prescription of as long as it takes. We want to go in, that's Colin Powell, kill the enemy, and then finish it off and get out. So as long as it takes, we're not in for that kind of a war of attrition that goes on for 10 years. And I don't think the Ukrainians are either. That's why I think you're going to be very surprised when the bridge comes down and when they attack in Crimea, simply because it's not a very defensible place. And they're not dug in there. See, in Donbass, they've been there now for, what, 8 years. They've been digging bunkers and trenches and this and that, burying stuff. There are no really heavy-duty visible stuff. They had a couple of air bases and maybe some, whatever. The Navy headquarters is there. Well, when has the Navy headquarters ever been, burrowed into the ground? So it's not currently defensible, and that's why that's where they're going to go.
Well, we won't be surprised anymore because you've told us now
Well,
already,
the
so.
cat's out of the bag. I mean,
You've
As of
spoiled
today,
Christmas, I guess.
well, I get along very well with the Ukrainians because I also get along well with the British. And the relationship there is much quieter. I mean, Boris goes and does photo ops because he loves to go to Ukraine and do photo ops. But the British understand how to work. You see, they're not Europe, and of course they did the Brexit and left Europe, but they are Europe when it comes to assessing the risks.
Sure.
And the value proposition they say is, we have to stop this maniac here, or there's no telling what will come next. That's what scared Finland and Sweden into coming into NATO, because they know that umbrella is worth something. Up until a few months ago, when Trump was in the White House, over a year ago, he was depreciating. But he didn't understand military doctrine. He didn't understand foreign policy. But suddenly, the NATO seal of approval is worth something today. People want it,
Yeah.
It's like a green energy seal on a new building, or there's a name for it.
LEED.
LEED, yeah, LEED. They want that LEED symbol. They want that NATO sign at the door, or the sign in the front yard, or ADT, or whatever the others are, Slogan and Shield.
Right.
So it's all changed. It's a different world. You have to think dynamically. So your second question was?
So the next sort of follow-up, and you touched a little bit on it, is in terms of long-term support, does this, you mentioned Fox News personalities saying we don't need to be there, a number of Republican...
Trump isn't good on this either. I haven't written the story yet because I'm a month or two behind, but I'm certainly going to criticize him for what his son said, calling them all kleptocrats. I saw anybody that shouldn't be throwing stones about being unethical. It's the Trump family. I voted for Trump. I voted for him. I'll vote for him again if it's a choice between Trump and Biden. Trump has my vote, without doubt or without question. But that doesn't mean that I accept all of his nonsense at face value. I've known Trump for 43 years, and he's always been a little dodgy. But, his sons are yapping about Ukraine and insulting the country. That's really terrible. Those people are fighting a brutal war, and to go and demean them. And I've got a really tough column to come before the primary on Trump, and to say, you have to apologize for what you said. You said that Putin was a genius, and then you kind of mumbled, well, maybe the Republican Party is not going to nominate a candidate for president in 2024 that believes Putin is a genius. I think Republicans, and this is a little political insight, they're willing to put up with a certain amount of Trump's malarkey because he brings the people into the circus tent, and they like that. But there are limits. And one of the limits is going to be that he's got to stop acting as a toady to dictators and wishing he was Xi Jinping or Putin, and how nice you don't have to have elections and this and that, or whatever, being an autocrat. That is not going to be acceptable to the Republican base. Right now, there's a lot of hullabaloo. I was there in Palm Beach. I was in court when they had the search warrant thing, and I didn't get to read it today, but I will. He has a pathway, but it's going to be narrowed by the Republican people. And particularly if all of these candidates that he selected, Blake Masters and Dr. Oz, and of course Herschel Walker's a disaster, if they all get defeated, Trump's in trouble. Trump's in trouble. But here's the problem. What does a president do? A president is a salesman. Kennedy came out, we're going to the moon. You were too young to remember that. I was there.
I've heard it there.
Yeah, we're going to the moon. And he had a line about, we don't do these things because they're easy, but because they're hard. That's one they often play. What are you talking about? Going to the moon. But then he started the program, and they went to the moon because he sold it. And then LBJ came in, well, the President Kennedy said we're going to the moon. Well, we're going to the moon. They went. Now, again, I don't want to bash Biden, that's not my purpose of being here, but the man is visibly not well. He has problems. How bad they are, only God knows, and his, whatever, his family. But he's not able to sell these policies. He's not able to get up and vigorously present. I was looking at something the other night on TV, just a couple of days ago. This was something from 4 or 5 years ago, the old Biden. My God, he was, he's a talker. He's got the blarney. He can talk. Well, he used to be able to. Now he can't. It's kind of sad to watch him. We need a salesman. We need a leader. And right now we don't have that. But luckily our system is well organized that even without it, people know what has to be done and things get done. And he's approved it. I mean, I don't know how much is working on top, but there's enough working that he signed something and said, go get him. But we need a strong leader. That's what the president is supposed to be. And, Trump often had bad policies, but he was a strong salesman. Often he didn't know what his policy was, but he was a strong salesman. And so you had to counteract that, even though what he was saying was nonsense, let's forget about NATO. He had a great idea. Pay your fair share. Who could be against that? But he wasn't good at conveying that to Europe. Now, they don't have a choice. Once again, it's like the Cold War. Please, United States, come and help us. We can't do it on our own, which is true. Those air bases in Poland are going nowhere. And my understanding is that there's an air base now open in Ukraine, near Kyiv, where they're unloading the supply. And they no longer port the stuff from Poland. They literally bring it right to where it needs to go. So I don't think we're going anywhere. Putin thought he was going to scare the world. It's the most backward political decision that's ever been made. That's totally out of character. I don't know what's going on up in his head either. I don't know. I don't think he's seen now other than talking about what the problems are. But it was a decision that was so disastrous, so contemptuous of watching. We've got to hope that we do the right thing and we don't get too full of ourselves and have too much hubris ourselves. And let them take the credit for it because they're fighting and dying. But by golly, I'm happy for Uncle Sam to send every HIMARS missile we have. I'd rather fight them in the Donbass or in Crimea than fight them in Delaware.
Yeah.
Nobody's going to argue with that.
No, I don't think so.
So we're right back where we were 50 years ago.
So I've got one final question before we wrap up here. Can you just give us some insight into your thoughts on what the proper role of the U.S. in the world is, and why people should or should not care about what's going on in different parts of the world?
Okay. It's in our economic self-interest to be a leader. Anywhere in the world that you go, the American dollar is currency. In some cases, it's officially the currency as it is here. In other places, it is a sort of a black market currency. Nobody wants to hold Chinese renminbi or Russian rubles or Indian rupees or whatever other currencies we can dig up. We benefit from that economically because our economic system essentially extends around the world. It's dishonest to say I want the benefits of being the leader, but I don't want to have to get up occasionally and lead. You see, so I grew up during the Cold War. Young men, we trained. We were told we were ready to bomb Russia. We said okay. We beat them. We never did have to fight them, but we were committed to making the U.S. a strong nation. It's easy to talk about let Europe do Europe and let Asia be Asia. Small countries need help. I understand that visiting some of these Baltic countries, Latvia, Lithuania, and Estonia, very beautiful places, nice cities, old cities, this and that. They can't organize a global response to anything, whether it's military, political, economic, whatever. They rely on us. There's nothing wrong with that. We're a huge country. At the end of the day, nobody's fighting over the dollar. Nobody wants to dismantle the State Department. I mean, I understand they're not perfect, but they do their job. When the war got bad, we pulled the State Department out of Kiev and put them in Poland temporarily. They were in Warsaw when I got to Warsaw. Then, of course, then the British went in. Of course, the Americans couldn't stay out of it. If the British were in Kiev, then the Americans. Of course, when Boris went, well, we can't match Boris because Boris is healthy. He may be a bit of a jerk, but he's healthy. We couldn't send Biden there because he's too vulnerable. But then the U.S. Embassy had to reopen, so the U.S. Embassy reopened. Now, this past week, we told everybody to get the hell out again. Vamoose, skedaddle. Putin's going to come and get us. But the embassy didn't go this time. See, the embassy said, "Oh, sorry about that, Bob. We're staying put." They're bunkered in now because we're committed and we see the whole thing. So I view the United States as a benevolent presence in the world. We don't want any conquest. We're not rebuilding the American empire. Ultimately, I disagreed with abandoning Afghanistan, but the public spoke and nobody could make the contrary case effectively, so the withdrawal argument, it carried, even though I didn't agree with it. Likewise, I opposed the invasion of Iraq. I marched on Fifth Avenue with my church to oppose invading it. It's insane. There are no weapons there. Bush didn't listen. He's completely incompetent. Well, eventually, they found that people were right. There were no secret weapons and caches, and we left. And, we still have, I don't know, 2,500 people there, and there's a presence up in the northern part, and there's a little bigger presence up in Kurdistan, because every now and then the Iranians will shoot at it. But basically, there's a very subdued presence there. The Iranians go about, I apologize, the Iraqis go about arguing and doing their thing. But they haven't asked us to leave, but if they did, we'd go. I don't know who the president would be, whether it's Trump or Biden at the time.
Right.
But we're not there. We don't own Iraq. I mean, the only cockamamie thing that was ever said about Iraq was Trump saying we should take their oil, which would be like being rapacious. We didn't take a can of oil. We couldn't do an oil change on a Humvee with the oil that we took from Iraq. So we're a good people, and we have something to contribute. Now, we get compensated very well for it. We have a high standard of living. All this crap about doing away with cars and everybody, eating freeze-dried food because we can't afford meat or this, that's eventually going to get wiped out in the coming backlash. There's going to be a backlash. I think it's going to start this year. It may not be as pervasive as it could have been because Trump has been such a confusing factor with all his theatrics. But the American people, the head of steam is building up. It's going to blow in 2024 because people are tired of this crap. Crime in the streets, every day you turn on the television, there's some new thing in Chicago or LA or New York or Washington, or even in New Orleans where the mayor went to court to defend a carjacker. The stupid stuff. And then telling people, go ahead and borrow money for college, but you don't have to pay it back. I just think that the public is not happy. That's why you see these huge numbers, the wrong way, 75% or whatever the surveys. They're not happy. I don't think they necessarily think, at least as of today, that the Republicans represent salvation. But we need to elect what I would call kick-ass Republicans. Guys like Tom Cotton who understand that you've got to be strong. You know, and even, you know. So I'm looking forward to this election. Again, I'm an underdog. I'm the Cinderella candidate. It doesn't look like the great pumpkin is coming for me. But the bottom line is, I'm an optimist. You know, when I took the oath of enlistment at the age of 18 years old to support and defend the Constitution, that was serious. We took our commitment to the country seriously. And that spirit still exists. It exists in New Hampshire, for example. It may not exist in New York City or Washington or LA, but there's a lot of this country where it exists, and there's a war going on domestically between people who want to get rid of that live free or die attitude. And this everything goes type approach. And there are no rules, no limits. But people don't like that. We have rules and limits for a reason. We're doing a good job within the existing system. We didn't have to change anything to help defend the Ukrainians. And that's having a profound effect right across Europe. We figured out who our friends are not. The Germans, or as I call them, the Bosch. Because at prep school, Mr. Lloyd Jones used to call them the Bosch. He'd been gassed by the Bosch in World War I. The French are always going to be the French. I was once stabbed by a French boy at prep school, so
I don't know that I want to go to your prep school.
Yeah.
It seems like a dangerous spot.
Hampshire Hall was quite a place. So I have my limits. I've never been to Paris, but my point is, we're a stable meat and potatoes country. We're a stable meat and potatoes state. It's amazing that we have a congressional delegation that's the opposite of the culture of the state. But maybe in time it'll change. It's not going to change in this election, I don't think. But Ukraine is a defining moment because it's the moment when the Congress, it was like 90% votes in both houses, made a decision that we have to do something about this, notwithstanding the other malarkey that we're fighting over. And the majorities may come down, but ultimately they'll hold. And honestly, my opinion, we need to give them about $1 billion a week. So when you say $3 billion, 3 weeks, we're shooting a lot of ordnance. That's what war is. You know, that's what it is. And we've got to keep that plant that makes the HIMARS missiles going 24/7. But ultimately, we're a good country. We have a stable political system. Democracy is not going to disappear. If anything, Donald Trump embedded more democracy in the country because he showed that people could be a little unscrupulous. And as a Republican, I certainly don't endorse what he said and did on January 6th. It was not anywhere near acceptable behavior. But he actually strengthened our institutions, you see. We know now that there are gaps, and people are more vigilant. Both parties. I have nothing against the Democrats, by the way. There are a lot of good Democrats out there, particularly in the heartland, who, it's a cultural thing. They're not New York, Manhattan Democrats, or what is there, AOC Democrats, or the group out of Minnesota, or whatever. They're just ordinary people. Want to live their lives, go to work, provide for their families, whatever. Get a car that they can afford. Who can afford an electric vehicle unless you got a lot of money? I can. $65,000. And then the battery may not work in the winter. A lot of people, if you remember last winter, remember when they had that huge pileup in Virginia, where I-95 was just completely screwed up?
A couple Congress people were caught in that.
Yeah, that's right. But a lot of people that had EVs were in a mess because the battery stopped working. Stranded. Doesn't happen with a combustion engine car. You go with a can, pour some gas in, and boom, you're gone. So I'm an optimist. I bring an optimistic message. let's not overdo it, but let's stay true to our principles, and that's the way I feel. It's the way I felt when I was 21 years old, and they said, you're going to Asia. What are you talking about? We need, this is what the deal is, and here's a large amount of money, and this is what you're gonna do.
Yeah.
And I went. And I hung out at airports and or jumped into race paddies, you know, and with people shooting at me and whatever. I was a civilian, I was not in military uniform. But my job was to see how the war was going and what was working and what wasn't. And the point is, you know, in 2016, when people were all upset, maybe Trump was going to win. And my answer to that was, I think it was the 10th of November, the day after the election. I said, the United States of America will open for business. And I don't know what election day is in 2024, but the day afterwards, the United States of America will open for business. We were needed in Ukraine. We had people there to do the job. So when people, we don't need in our Air Force, we're going to disband the Army, we're going to get rid of the CIA. It's not always pleasant to watch, but it's essential. You've got bad people out there. It's like saying you don't want a police force. What would happen in New York if they abolished the police force? It breaks my heart every time I see the stories on the news. So we have a culture here of respect and mutual. It's been a little bruised, I'm not going to deny that. And the extremists are a little bit louder than they used to be because they have megaphones now, like social media that didn't exist. At the end of the day, I believe in the common sense of the American people, and also in my own common sense.
Well, that's good. I do feel like common sense is not so common anymore, but maybe.
And if the voters want to send me to Washington to be a very effective representative, I'm happy to go.
Sure.
If not, okay, I've got other things that I can do, and I'll be perfectly happy to do them.
Well, good. Well,
And, you know, a lot of places I've never got. I've never been to Paris.
there you go. Maybe next on your trip. All right. Well, thank you so much for your time and your insights. This has
So
been,
we've done, certainly we've recorded something that can be used to blackmail me in the future.
well, you know, we don't put that part out.
I'm gonna get a guy to start my car.
Yeah, there you
Well,
go.
this guy says they're gonna attack you, but anyway, who does he know?
Yeah,
Have we checked into his sources?
yeah.
Well, was it compromised by Natasha that Mr. Zelensky sent to get them on his side? I don't know.
Well, we'll for our own sake, we hope the Russians are watching, but perhaps for your sake.
They probably are. I've always gotten along well with all sides.
Sure.
When I was in Laos, we had an operation there. Within a couple of blocks, we had the Pathet Lao, the North Vietnamese, Viet Cong, the Russians, the Chi Coms, and there are a few more, but I may have forgotten. It'll be a great story if I ever sit down and get the time to write it. And I got along with always talking to people.
Sure.
And and not that I'd want to work in the State Department, but I'm a very sort of effective ad hoc diplomat.
There you go.
You know.
Well, we at the World Affairs Council of New Hampshire truly believe in citizen diplomacy, getting out there talking with
It
people.
does a lot, yes, it does. It really is meaningful because any big institution, whether it's an assembly line at Ford or the military at West Point or Annapolis or whatever, or even the Foreign Service School or Foreign Service Office, there's a certain modernization, I should say. And you go through that and you develop that culture. Now, we need the culture because we need to have an embassy in, I don't know, Bulgaria or Ukraine or even in Peking, as I call it, it's the irritating Chinese. I'm just a bastard when it comes to irritating Chinese. But we need more than that. We need thinkers that are, you know, and we've got people like that, actually in both parties. But I don't know.
Great.
I pray that it's not Biden versus Trump again.
Sure.
But as I look at Biden and I look at the Democratic Party, I'm not speaking on a partisan basis. It's not like I care, but I don't see who they put up instead of Biden. The Boots coming up here, he was complaining they're gonna put up heated sidewalks in Berlin, and they're throwing money at that, and he's coming for now they call it the Roosevelt, and it was not the Jefferson Jackson dinner.
Okay.
See, it used to be called Jefferson Jackson dinner, but they were slaveholders and racist, so now it's the Omar Roosevelt.
Okay.
So the Boots coming up for that, but I don't see if he's having he doesn't have a bat to hit major league pitching. But, okay, well,
Great.
you've got a tape, and
Yeah.
maybe somebody may watch it.
All right. Well, thank you so much to our audience and for those who are watching the recording. We really appreciate
Thank you for
taking
not eating
interest.
popcorn and chewing and making obnoxious noises during the program.
Yeah, thank you so much. We really appreciate it and have a great evening.